excited to have you here. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and happy Friday. Love to hear from you to share with our listeners. Who are you personally and professionally?
Well, that's a tall order. My name is Regina Sanders. I am a partner at EY, and I've been with EY for the past 8 years. I've been a supply chain practitioner, though, for the last 25 years. And my path to supply chain was probably a little bit unconventional, but maybe it wasn't because what I'm finding is I meet women, a lot of people kind of fell into supply chain. So I'll start kind of at the beginning. I studied engineering in college, mechanical engineering undergrad, and material science and engineering for graduate school. And my plan was to eventually get a PhD in engineering. That was my plan. But when I was in graduate school, I had what I call my crisis of belief. As much as I liked engineering, I kind of didn't want to do it. During my internships, I liked what I saw, but the roles that interested me the most were those individuals who were engineers that had sort of graduated to being like department heads and they were running big programs and projects. And
Mm,
so I was like, well, what can I do to find a job like that? And I explored a lot of different things when I was in grad school. I even took some classes in educational leadership. But I went to a career fair and I saw Anderson Consulting. And I ended up having a conversation with them. And the interview questions were interesting to me because they were not necessarily technical questions. They were more, tell me about a time when you worked with a team. What was your problem solving technique? How did you apply critical thinking? Those types of things. And so I was like, okay, this is interesting. And so I ended up accepting an offer from Anderson Consulting, which of course became Accenture. And my very
mm,
first project was coding manufacturing execution system software. And so from there, it evolved to production scheduling. And after production scheduling, I did some inventory studies and some supply planning. And then that branched me into demand planning. And somewhere along the way, I did some fulfillment operations. So I'll say, like, within about 3 to 5 years, I was quote unquote a supply chain person. And the interesting thing about journey and the work that I've started off doing and even still do, everything had always been enabled by technology. Um, ERP systems, boutique supply chain planning softwares, all of those were part of what I ended up doing and the work that I did. So, spent 15 years at Accenture doing that type of work, had an opportunity to leave to go to a small boutique firm called Six Sigma Academy and Company. They wanted to have a step change in their business and wanted someone who also understood technology. So I joined them and started their business technology practice. And as I was looking at the work we were doing, a lot of it, of course, was operations. But I'm like, why don't we just rebrand this and call it supply chain? So I essentially started their supply chain practice and then had a great opportunity there, did a lot of work in private equity, but still mostly focused on manufacturing clients. And I was at a conference for women leaders in supply chain. And I stumbled across the leader for the supply chain practice at the time at EY. We struck up a friendship and stayed in touch with each other. About 6 months after I met her, she called me up and said, hey, we're looking to bring new talent to EY. I'd love to tap into your network. And I was like, sure, I know some people who could be interested. And she's like, well, I'll be in Atlanta and we can meet for dinner. And I said, great. So we met for dinner and you can imagine how the conversation went. Within about 5 minutes, she said, yeah, I really don't want to tap into your network. I want to tap into you and convince you to come to EY. So, ended up at EY in their supply chain practice, and it's so funny story. And then, after about 3 years, I ended up leading the supply chain practice for one of our regions, all still while serving clients, mostly in the supply chain space. And then that brings me to where I am now. I am now the managing partner for Ernst& Young in Atlanta, and I still, serve a lot of different accounts. I'm a supply chain expert coming in to talk to different people about their supply chain challenges. And now the new technology is AI. So is how do we enable supply chain with AI? How do we make things a lot more efficient and productive? So that's kind of my professional story. Personally, only child, grew up in small town Alabama. My mother was a teacher, my dad was a licensed electrician, and he sold insurance. And I grew up just like really inquisitive about things. And I think I grew up a little fast because I was always surrounded by adults. So that's kind of a little bit of my personality. I'm kind of always the mama of the group with my friends. And I also like to say that I am a wine enthusiast. One of the things that I'm passionate
Oh,
about is wine. So I'm in the process of studying for my wine certification. I just completed my WSET 1 back in May. So, the journey is going to be long, but that's part of my retirement strategy. Um, I don't have children, but I'm everyone's favorite auntie. I have four goddaughters. My best friend from college has two girls that are 21 and 24. And then my youngest two are in Atlanta. They are 8 and 5. So, a lot of fun times.
so Regina, do you know Camille? She has a I'd
Sister
say,
Sips.
yeah, Sister Sip Society in Atlanta. She got her why I said whatever. I'm gonna mess it up.
It's
Uh,
definitely a certification.
she
I
got
can't
her
spell the
Really?
name either.
certification, and it's a bunch of lovely black women and meet, and they talk and drink wine, and she's in Atlanta, so I
You
will
know,
connect
please
you
connect
to that
us.
group.
That name sounds familiar because what I found is that the more you kind of talk about your love for wine, there's more and more people who know each other. And so we just started a bit of a wine club here in Atlanta as well called the Perlant. So I'd love to connect with Camille
Okay,
and,
maybe your two
exchange
wine
some
clubs
good
could
bottles.
connect. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's awesome. Okay, I will
That is
connect you too.
awesome. I love it when these connections happen.
I know.
absolutely.
So you talked a lot about this a little bit, Regina, where it sounds like, hey, you were doing engineering, you're like, I don't know if I love this, and you saw some of the roles. And I love too how your career path just took you along so many points along the supply chain too. And I love that you started coding MES systems. That's pretty incredible.
In
Um,
Unix, no doubt.
was there a moment though where as you were going through all these different, maybe it built or maybe it was a moment, but you just kind of knew like this place is for me. Like I love supply chain and this is where I want to stay. This is where I want to be.
I think it clicked with me probably about 3 years in. I was doing a project that was part of a big SAP implementation with a large equipment manufacturer, and we were doing spare parts, forecasting spare parts. And I feel like that's when it really clicked for me because I got in the weeds of what it meant to do forecasting and understanding all the different demand signals. And we were
Ah.
also implementing a software package that was sort of new on the market. And so it was kind of the first time that soup to nuts, I really had to understand all the different dimensions and understand, what weight to give to some of the different demand signals that we were getting. This particular application ended up being um, combustion engine turbine parts for combustion engines that are used in power plants. And so some engines are run as base loaded units, some engines are run as peakers, and based on how the engines are run, will determine, the amount of fatigue or whatever. So we were leveraging, and
Mm-hmm.
this is interesting. This is quite frankly probably the early days of AI. We were leveraging causal factors to add that in as a demand signal based on how an engine was run, in addition to historical sales or planned outages, things that
Mm-hmm.
were knowns. That was kind of the unknown. And as I think about it now, that kind of was the beginning of leveraging causal factors that are sometimes that are beginning to be used in AI.
That is so cool. And I think too, as you were talking, like it sparked joy for me listening to you talk about it because I think when you have that moment in supply chain when you realize how many things in the world like can connect and that you can actually improve and make better.
So true.
It's so true and it's so cool. Okay, so how about now fast forward to today? You're at maybe your wine club, or maybe you're gonna go to the new Camille's Wine Club. I don't know yet, but you meet everybody for the first time and they ask you what you do. How do you explain like what a day in your life is like?
Okay, so a day in my life right now is like multifaceted because in my current role, I kind of wear, I'd say, four different hats. So, as office managing partner, I'm
All right.
responsible for growing our market here in Atlanta. So that means that I'm constantly leveraging data that my teams give me, understanding, what market share we have, what we don't have, as we're working with, who we're not working with, who's working on those clients, how we might be able to expand and build relationships. So I might be having client meetings. Um, I might be, putting together a presentation, preparing for a meeting. That's part of my day. The other part of my job is also establishing a good culture for our people here in Atlanta. So it could be meeting with a group of senior managers, understanding what's on their mind, helping to position them to be able to be better consultants. So that might be part of my day. And then the last part, in this role, there's a lot of different local organizations that are important for me to um be part of. And so I might have a board meeting or two. And I said that was the last thing, but the other part of my job is working with my teams on the accounts that I'm responsible for.
There's a fifth
And
one.
um, like I differentially give a little bit more attention to the folks on my team who are working on supply chain problems because that's my space. But, I could have a myriad of client meetings. And so, my day is not just spent behind computer putting together presentations. It's, spent, really being out in the market, building relationships, coaching people, and, listening and paying attention to what some of the economic trends are that I might be able to take to some of the conversations that I'm going to be having. In fact, just yesterday, had a meeting with the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce, and we were talking about economic trends in Atlanta, but also the state of Georgia. And we were fortunate to have the chair of the Federal Reserve here in Atlanta there. And we were talking about, what are the different issues that are impacting the labor market now? What does that look like? So AI came up, supply chain came up. I was so excited that the chair of the Federal Reserve actually mentioned supply chain challenges and how companies are dealing with tariffs. All of those things are impacting their demand. It's also impacting their workforce. And so just sitting there, it was exciting to me to think about how all these things are so interconnected. And I sometimes would guarantee you that prior to the pandemic, I don't know that the terminology supply chain would have come up in
Hmm.
that setting. But since the pandemic, everybody knows what supply chain is. And even now, more so with what's happening with tariffs and doing some of the simulations and trade offs to think about where I should be manufacturing, what manufacturing can I bring to the US. All those things are topics of conversations now that I think that the average person who wouldn't have had those conversations in the past is now having those conversations. So that just confirms for me that where I am in terms of being a supply chain professional in the midst of all that is the right place to be.
Regina, just for us to understand your role, how many managing partners are there at EY and how big is your team?
So every office that EY has a managing partner, and there's roughly 50 or so. I'm probably getting that number wrong, but roughly 50 or so offices across the US. And each one of those offices has a managing partner. And all of us as managing partners have kind of the same role to grow the local market, to be in front of clients. But we also have our day job of serving our own clients as well. So that's really the job.
Thank
Yeah, it's
you.
a big deal. I think it's a big deal. I think people
Hmm.
hear that sometimes. I'm like, no, that's like one of the largest consulting firms, and she's a managing partner at it.
Exactly. I
So,
just wanted to throw that
yeah.
out there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I
So,
appreciate that.
Regina, with over 25 years of experience in business transformation and your career spanned Accenture, EY, you've seen supply chain evolve. So, what are some of the biggest changes that you've observed in how companies are approaching their supply chain strategy?
Well, I think in the past, people thought about supply chain in a very linear way. And they also thought about it, very functionally. Like folks in procurement just talk to people in procurement. People in
Mm,
planning just talk to people in planning. They might talk to people in manufacturing, especially when, there's the need to connect those dots. But by and large, that's how people function, kind of in silos in the past. And I think that what we've come to understand over the years is that supply chains are not linear. They are connected ecosystems with a number of different stakeholders, and all those stakeholders have to communicate with each other. I think the other thing is the use of technology. Technology has made it a lot easier to connect the end-to-end supply chain. When I coach people and tell them how to be successful, I'm like, have a fastball. It's good to sort of know procurement or fulfillment or planning, but you also have to be able to connect the dots across the end-to-end supply chain. You also have to understand how technology enables that as well. And so I think that supply chains have probably always been as complicated as they are now. But I think that one of the pieces of that complexity is that we're looking at things a lot more holistically than we did in the past. And I think that's a big change. I think that the other big change is just the visibility that supply chain has to corporate boards, because it really is the heartbeat of an enterprise. I mean, whether you make products or not, um, you have a supply chain because you have to procure supplies, right? Um, Even if you are in the services business, there is a supply chain that's part of providing that service to the customer. So I think that there's just so much more greater awareness. And I think that, it's different because people are recognizing that it's a change management problem. You've got to connect. You can't operate in silos, and you've got to realize there's so many different parts to be able to make it work in the most efficient way.
Okay, so that kind of leads into this next question. So you are kind of you work in the heart of all of it. So it is supply chain analytics, it's demand and supply planning, it's technology, it's building new digital capabilities. As you're trying to connect across the supply chain, and like how you said, it's not linear, it's an ecosystem. Um, and people are trying to bring things to life. Is there any misconception that they have about data? Like, do they have enough data? Is it clean enough? Like, what do you see there as barriers to get going on some of these things? And any recommendations you might have for somebody who's like trying to approach this and solve a problem in their company when it
So
comes
I
to
think that
like
you nailed
cultivation
it with the
across the
third thing that
ecosystem?
yeah, I think that you nailed it with the last thing that you said, data. Supply chain generates like, gigabytes of data, right? But, is that data really going to be useful? And I think that that's one of the biggest challenges today. Making sure that the data is one that you actually can make decisions from. And, what I typically do with a lot of my clients, and some of my clients have, started doing this on their own. It's let's make sure that we've got clean data, that we've got good data governance processes in place so that we can ensure that over time, that data is going to be data that we can trust. So I think that that's one thing. Um, Another thing that I would draw attention to as a challenge is adopting the right technology because I think that there's so many choices out there. And I think that a lot of times people feel that by implementing a software solution, it's going to solve all the problems. Well, not necessarily, right? I think it's really important to really understand the nuances of a supply chain. Producing engines is going to be very different from producing, um, you know, baby clothes, right? I mean, because you're going to have different set of suppliers. They're going to come from different parts of the world. You're going to have different demand patterns. The complexity of the product is different. So recognizing those things, I think, is really important.
Do you think, I appreciate you calling out some of the differences, but do you think there are just some things that are just evergreen? Because sometimes I feel like we try, I hear a lot, well, that's different because you guys are making food but do you think there's some fundamentals, Regina, in terms of like a good operating supply chain that are important?
Yeah, there are. Right. So, one, going back to just the cross collaboration and teaming, that's extremely important. across the board. Sales and operations planning, it's an easy concept, but it's a hard thing to implement in the right way. So that's number one.
Mhm.
Number two is metrics, having the right metrics in place, because a lot of times there's competing metrics. Sales organizations are incentivized in a different way than people in manufacturing. They're focused on plant uptime, right? And so, does the plant uptime metric coincide with the parameters and expectations that are being made on the sales organization? You also think about procurement. Procurement is negotiating to get the right pricing on raw materials. Are we having them communicate enough with planning and manufacturing to know what the right lot sizes should be so that they can negotiate contracts and put the things in with the suppliers that are really going to be needed to get the products or services to the end customer in the timely fashion, because then you've got to think about lead time. So, those are things that I feel, are important that can't be overlooked, that are the fundamentals that you have to get right, that coordination across the board, that making sure that you don't have competing metrics, that you have identified clear roles and responsibilities for everyone who's along the way in the supply chain. That's important. And understanding how to leverage technology in the right way.
You talked about the importance of the collaboration between the business team, supply chain, and IT. And for many companies, that's a challenge. So, what are some keys to success as you think about you're trying to implement a major transformation? We need to break down some complex concepts to non-technical audiences and really make sure we bring everybody along. So, any thoughts on strategies or keys to success there?
So I think number one is understand who all the stakeholders are up front and set the proper expectations with those stakeholders. Number two is understand the problem that you're trying to solve. I think a lot of times we want to throw a technology at a problem without really knowing what the problem is that we're trying to solve to begin with. And then the third thing is having good stakeholders that are influencers in the organization to understand what the problem is and what the planned solution is so that they can be the voice of whatever this change is long term. Because a lot of times what happens is you implement a new process or a new technology or a new operating model change, and it doesn't work because people are not adopting it. And so it's important to do the baselining up front to understand what are some of the key metrics and where you stand now so that you can actually show what the improvement is once you move forward in the implementation. So I think all of those things are just very practical, but very core basics of success if you're going to go forward with any transformation.
I think those things apply whether it's a massive transformation or even maybe like a smaller change. A change is a change. And so having that, just being more strategic and thoughtful about that with the stakeholders is so important. Okay. I have another question for you. Since you get to see so many things in your role, you get to work with all these different companies, see all these different challenges. Um, are there any common themes you're seeing across the industry? And I was actually a little bit interested in like advanced manufacturing, like anything, any changes, like because we're hearing a lot and a lot and a lot and a lot around the impact of technology on planning. But kind of curious if you're also seeing any big step changes in advanced manufacturing too, and like how are you helping clients navigate that area?
So the use of robotics is something that's huge. Also, it's funny because I think 5 years ago, we talked a lot about the journey to autonomous supply chains. Won't say that I was a naysayer, but I'm seeing it come to fruition now, where we can leverage machine learning to basically generate
Mm.
what a forecast needs to be for us and then go in and make small tweaks to it. So that's a big trend. I think right after the pandemic, there was a lot of talk around setting up control towers so that you had visibility across what was happening with the supply chain. That's still important. Setting up digital twins to simulate if I want to add, a new
Mm.
manufacturing line What would that do to my capacity before you actually do it and spend the capital to do it? That's something that we do with a lot of our clients as well. And then, just this whole notion of AI and how do we use it more to help us be more predictive, bringing causality into um, into some of the algorithms and workflows so that we can understand how different trends that might seem unrelated are really impacting the product that we need to be making, how often we should make it, where we should be making it, where we should pinpoint selling it, as well as where we should be locating our suppliers. And not to mention looking at the whole network of where my distribution center should be located, where I should be storing inventory. Those are a lot of the things that are happening that are offshoots of advanced manufacturing. But within the four walls of manufacturing, there's so many things that are being able to, that we're beginning to leverage around using optics to determine if there's defects as things are going down a production line. Using drones, right, within a warehouse to move materials in a way that we need to in a safe manner. Using those types of things to also check overall quality. All those are things that I'm seeing in manufacturing, and fortunate to work with clients and to brainstorm these ideas, but to also drive those efficiencies and help them better utilize data in manufacturing, but also help them to be better connected to upstream planning and downstream fulfillment operations.
Regina, I had a question. How much should you be changing or chasing trends when consumers right now can be quite fickle and change their mind? So how much should you be, as you're looking at data and analytics, do you have thoughts around how much you should be adjusting? And when do you know that something's going to stick? And like, how do you think about that?
So, that's where social media, comes into play, especially when you're looking in a business to consumer market. It's hard to predict, exactly what level of personalization people want, but I think that we have a lot of information at our disposal. So in the past it was just point of sale information. Now you can actually see how people are using the products that are being bought. So it's hard for me to say like, at what point do a product is one that you should double down on or not. Think that AI is going to help us get there by pulling in all those different threads from TikTok and Instagram to do that. But, you know, the way that we do it now is just be as predictive as we can. But I think that being predictive is going to be further enabled by AI in a way that if you ask this question to me 10 years from now, I'll say, I have an AI workflow that will tell me, 5 years from now, based on a multitude of factors, this is probably the product that I need to hang my hat on.
Okay, what are the things we talk about? So, in your view, what is the most effective way for a company to truly build a resilient supply chain? And can you talk a little bit about, you said this a little bit about how technology will play a role in that?
So, in order to have a resilient supply chain, it's got to be flexible. So that means that you've got to have visibility to what's going on. And I think that in order to do that, you've got to have great supplier relationship management so that you can understand what the capacity is of your suppliers, what the solvency is of those suppliers, what other customers those suppliers might have, and how much of their capacity is going to be earmarked for you. So that end-to-end visibility, as I mentioned before, is really, really important. And that's where technology comes in, allowing you to have that visibility. Now, of course, not all suppliers are created equal. Some are small.
Mm.
They might not be able to feed you that type of information, but that's where the relationship comes into play. So making sure that you're collaborating with them is extremely important to be able to give you that piece of the puzzle. I think also there's a lot of intelligence that's built into the technology that exists today, right? So, when I look at the supply chain point solutions, when I look at how people are leveraging machine learning, there's a lot of of basics that are already inherent in the software, and I think that that makes it a lot easier for people to, get that visibility they need to build resilient supply chains. I think the other piece to that is making sure that you have alternative sources of supply, because if something happens at one, you don't want to skip a beat. I think it's also important for you to have a good understanding of where your customer concentration is so that when you set up your supply chain network, you've got some flexibility there too. And I also think that it stems back into product development, being able to develop products that can be more interchangeable so that you might do the customization at the very end when you understand exactly what the customer's needs are going to be. So product
Yeah.
development is a huge part of this equation as well.
There are so many good things there. I think for me, as I'm listening to it too, and I think for some of our listeners, who ask us questions about resiliency and how do you build all this in and the flexibility. How are you finding people? Because the next thing is like people always jump to like, well, it's going to cost you more. Like that's going to cost you more, and how do you balance that though, or help people maybe see the broader story of yeah, it might, but also like the loss of sales might cost you. Not being able to innovate as quickly as you want to with that customer might also like there might be a loss of sales there or a loss of market share. How are you finding different companies sort of navigating that conversation? Because sometimes that's what I'll hear is like the challenge or the pushback for making your supply chain more flexible to be resilient.
So I think benchmarking is important, looking at what others are doing in the industry. I think also it's important for companies to, think through what their constraints might be and what is important to their consumers. Over the past year in particular, I've had a lot of requests to do market analysis. And in doing market analysis, companies are trying to get, what customer sentiment really is to help
Mm,
them determine, what they need to do to navigate, some of these changes, some of the changes that might need to make in their products and how they take them to market.
great. Okay, so Regina, one of the questions we like to ask, in addition to all the amazing technical info that you've just shared with us, is a little bit too around your journey, leadership thoughts, and advice. And one of the questions is called Hero, Hardship, and Highlight. A hero is a person who has inspired you or encouraged you to achieve something. Hardship is a difficult experience or a challenge, but you really learned a lot about yourself through it. And then a highlight, and this is like a positive achievement or a proud moment. It could be professional, it could be personal. So hero, hardship, and highlight.
So all three of those, huh? Okay, so I'll start with the hero. And for hero, I'm going to say my paternal grandmother. So my grandmother and let's start by saying that my parents were in their 40s when I was born. So my dad was a child in like 1929. He was born in 1929. So
Mm,
1931 he was 2 years old. Montgomery, Alabama, the South.
mm,
My grandmother became a widow and she was left with a 2-year-old son, a 4-year-old daughter, an 8-year-old son, and a 17-year-old son. And she had a farm to run and a store to run in the rural South in the 1930s. So that
mm.
type of resilience that she had in the place that she was makes me proud, because I know that that same blood and that same independence and that same, stick to itiveness flows through my body. And so when I think about when I have hardships, kind of segueing to that, I think about it's probably nothing compared to what she was facing at that time, but still was able to be successful, raise a family, to, be the matriarch of our family, right? So that's super important to me, and I reflect on that a lot. Hardship. So I'll say the biggest hardship that I had was being disappointed that I didn't get that first promotion at my first firm. And not
Mm.
not first promotion, it was promotion to at the time managing director. And it was one of those situations where I felt like I had done everything that I needed to do, but the rules of engagement seemed to always change when it was my turn. And I think a lot of people probably go
Mm,
through that today. And so it was a time when I kind of paused and I took sort of like a self evaluation of what do I really want to do? And of course, my ultimate decision ended up being to leave that firm, but it wasn't because I was bitter or upset. It was that it taught me to be open to different opportunities and to begin to define what my goals and objectives were for me, right?
Mm.
I think that I spent a lot of time focusing on what was going to make me successful within that organization, which you should absolutely do. But I think that more importantly, you also have to define what's important to you as an individual. What are your personal goals? What are your personal passions? What are your strengths? And I think that having gone through that experience, when I had the opportunity and I worked with an executive coach who was a friend of mine, for the first time, probably at age 38, I had a short, medium, and long term plan that was based on my passions, my goals, and my strengths. And I was able to apply the context of the organization that I was in, but it was more about what can I do in the context of this organization to achieve these things for myself. And what I found is that when I was pursuing those things and leveraging the things that I was naturally gifted at doing, then the success where I was just happened, right? And I think that we sometimes get that
mm,
backwards or we maybe put too much weight on one versus the other. I think it's an Audre Lorde quote that says, if you don't define yourself for yourself, you'll be eaten up by what others think you should be and die, right? Or something to that effect. I know I didn't say that exactly right,
mm,
Mm.
but I think that that's really important for you to do that. And especially, being someone in corporate America, it's important to understand what the expectations are of you, but it's also to understand what you authentically bring to the table and how those things can be mutually compatible to each other, right? And I think that that's when you find that intersection of true success. And for me, it has been supply chain. It has been being in management consulting because I get a chance to do what I love to do every day. I love to solve problems and I love to help those around me become more successful and achieve their full potential. And I get to do that with the people that are on my teams, with my clients, um, and with anybody that I encounter when I'm able to share my story and to, help them solve big, gnarly, complex problems. And what was the last thing I'm supposed to share with you?
Highlight, yeah.
Highlight. So highlight. A highlight for me um has been being able to endow a scholarship in my name to young women who are pursuing engineering. So that to me, to get to a point in my career where I'm able to give back in that way, um, it just warms my heart. And I had a chance to go down when we first established the scholarship to meet two of the young women who were the first recipients. And one of them actually followed the path of management consulting. And so I try as best as I can to stay in touch with them to just kind of see their journey, to share things that I've done or pitfalls and, help them to maybe not encounter some of the challenges that I did. My dad used to always say, a smart person learns from experience, a wise person learns from the experience of others. And I want to be able to
Mm.
impart, some of my lessons learned along the way, professionally and personally, and those other folks. So I'd say that's been a huge highlight to be able to give back in that way.
That's amazing. I absolutely love that.
I will say the story about your grandmother that gave me chills, like, that is amazing, and I think it's easy for us to think our problems or what we have to go through is a hardship, and, um, that's super inspiring to hear, and just how you talk about her blood goes through your family, that's amazing. That's just like it gave me chills, and it's a really good reminder, and I try to remind myself about, I do feel like, and you are living it, Regina, in your endowment, but we have a lot of responsibility. We have a lot of people that came before us that made it possible for us to be doing what we're doing today. So thank you for sharing your story. This was like the best part of the interview, hearing those hardship highlight heroes. So thank you so much.
Thanks. Thanks. Thank you all so much for this opportunity. I love what you're doing. This is a great platform.
Thank you for joining us. This
Thank
has
you for able
been
to.
so good.
Yeah.
I've got so many good nuggets written down over here. And I've also just really enjoyed hearing more of your personal story too. I've heard you talk at Awesome a few times now. And always wowed by how smart you are and all the industry trends that you're keeping up with. But it was also just really wonderful to hear more of the personal side about you today too.
Yes, thank you,
Thanks.
thank you. And I wrote down crisis of belief.